My name is Oliver Bennett, and I grew up in a small, quiet town called Ravenwood, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and privacy was almost a foreign concept. I was the eldest of 3 siblings, with my younger sister Amelia and my brother Henry. Our parents, Claire and Thomas, worked tirelessly to provide for us, and I learned early on the importance of responsibility. From a young age, I was always the one people came to for help. Neighbors, teachers, even friends' parents trusted me because I was dependable. I prided myself on it. I believed that loyalty and integrity were the most important qualities a person could have. Little did I know, these values would one day become both my greatest strength and my worst vulnerability. Amelia, my younger sister, was the opposite of me. She was charming and persuasive, the kind of person who could talk her way out of almost anything. Our parents adored her, often indulging her whims and overlooking her mischief. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I loved my sister, and I assumed that family meant trust and unconditional support. High school was a blur of late-night study sessions, part-time jobs, and weekend soccer games. I had dreams of going to university, building a career in finance, and one day providing my own family with stability and love. Amelia, on the other hand, seemed focused on popularity, social gatherings, and never-ending schemes to get her way. Everything seemed ordinary, almost idyllic, until the summer I turned 21. That summer would change my life forever. It started with subtle whispers. I noticed Amelia had begun spending more time alone with her parents, talking in hushed tones that stopped whenever I entered the room. At first, I brushed it off as typical sibling rivalry or teenage drama lingering into young adulthood. But then, small incidents began piling up, money disappearing from my wallet, private messages on my phone going unanswered, rumors circulating that I had lied to our parents about my part-time jobs and savings. I confronted Amelia one evening. We were sitting in the living room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the room. Amelia, I began cautiously. Why are you telling Mom and Dad that I took money from them? I haven't touched anything that isn't mine. She smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that could disarm anyone. Oliver, you're imagining things. I would never lie to them. Maybe you just misplaced something. You're always so forgetful. Her words were like a knife wrapped in velvet. I wanted to believe her, but the unease gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. By the end of that summer, the whispers turned into accusations. Amelia had convinced our parents that I was untrustworthy, deceitful, and selfish. Despite years of being the reliable, responsible eldest child, my parents turned their backs on me. Oliver, my mother said one evening, her voice tight with disappointment, we don't know if we can trust you anymore. Maybe you should consider living on your own for a while. The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. I packed my things that night, my heart heavy, my trust in family shattered. I left Ravenwood with nothing but a small suitcase, a few cherished keepsakes, and the faint hope that someday, truth would prevail. Leaving Ravenwood wasn't easy. The town that had been my entire world suddenly felt like a cage I had finally escaped. I moved to Ashford, a bustling city a few hours away, where no one knew me or my family. The anonymity was freeing, but it also came with harsh realities. I had no job, no steady income, and only the few $100s I had saved from odd, part-time work over the years. The first weeks were brutal. I slept in a small, cramped apartment that smelled faintly of mildew, surviving on instant noodles and whatever leftovers I could scavenge from discount stores. Every night, I would sit on the worn couch, staring at the peeling wallpaper, replaying the events that had led me here. I kept thinking about my parents, my sister, and the betrayal that had driven me away. It was a bitter cocktail of anger, sadness, and disbelief, but I refused to let it break me. I remembered the values my parents had instilled in me: responsibility, loyalty, perseverance. If they wouldn't support me, I would support myself. I threw myself into job hunting, taking whatever work I could find. I started as a barista at a small cafe, then worked nights as a stock clerk at a supermarket. Every paycheck was a small victory, proof that I could survive on my own. During those long nights, I began to reflect on my life, my choices, and what it meant to truly be independent. I realized that while my family had abandoned me, the world outside offered opportunities I had never considered. I enrolled in online courses, studying finance and management, determined to create a career that would give me the stability I had always dreamed of. It wasn't just financial survival that I had to master. I also had to rebuild my sense of self. The betrayal had left deep scars. I struggled with trust, especially with people I allowed into my life. But slowly, Through friendships and small victories, I began to rediscover who I was outside of my family's shadow. One day, about 6 months after moving to Ashford, I met Clara, a kind-hearted woman who worked at the same cafe. She had a quiet strength and a sense of humor that made the days brighter. We started talking during breaks, sharing stories about our lives. I told her very little about my family at first, unsure if I could relive the pain. But her patience and understanding gave me the courage to open up gradually. Clara became my anchor. She encouraged me to pursue my education seriously, helped me apply for better jobs, and even assisted me in finding a slightly larger apartment when my finances improved. With her support, I started to see a future I had never imagined, one where I was in control of my own destiny, free from the shadows of Ravenwood. Meanwhile, life in Ravenwood continued without me. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my parents and sister were facing difficulties. Their small family business was failing, debts were piling up, and Amelia, who had once charmed everyone with her persuasive ways, was struggling to maintain her lifestyle. I admit, a small part of me felt satisfaction, knowing that life wasn't always kind to those who had betrayed me, but the larger part of me had moved on. I was focused on building my own path, one step at a time. By the time I had been in Ashford for 2 years, I had secured a stable position at a finance firm. My education was progressing well, and Clara and I had grown close. We often talked about our dreams, our fears, and the lives we wanted to build together. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace and purpose. Then came the phone call that would test everything I had built. It was from my mother. "Oliver," she said, her voice shaking, we need your help. We're in trouble. The house, the business, everything's falling apart. Please, you're our only hope." I felt a wave of conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, resentment, and even a strange twinge of sadness. I had spent years working, struggling, and surviving without them. Why should I help now, when they had turned their backs on me so easily? I asked her, calmly but firmly, "Mom, do you remember what you said to me the night you kicked me out? Do you remember how you believed Amelia over me? How you let me leave with nothing?" There was silence on the other end. I could hear her swallow hard, and I knew she remembered every word. I know, Oliver, we were wrong. Please, just this once, help us," she pleaded. I looked at Clara, who had been silently listening. She squeezed my hand. I knew I had a choice. I could forgive them and help, or I could let them face the consequences of their actions. I chose the latter. I didn't answer my mother's pleas immediately. Instead, I took time to think, to remember every detail of how they had abandoned me, and every moment I had spent struggling on my own, while they had ignored my existence. To decades of loyalty and care, and a single lie from Amelia had undone it all. When I finally decided to respond, it was on my terms. I agreed to meet them, not to forgive, not to help, but to confront the reality of our past. The meeting was set in a neutral place, a quiet cafe halfway between Ashford and Ravenwood. I wanted witnesses, people who could ensure honesty and civility. And I didn't want to be alone with the family who had hurt me. As they arrived, I noticed how time had changed them. My mother looked older, more worn than I remembered, and my father's shoulders were heavier, weighed down by regret. Amelia, however, still carried herself with the same charm that had caused so much damage, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as she realized she no longer had the power to manipulate me. I spoke first. "Do you understand why I left? Do you remember the years you turned your backs on me because of Amelia's lies?" They all looked down, avoiding my gaze. My father's voice broke the silence. "Oliver, we made mistakes. We thought we were doing the right thing." Mistakes. I thought bitterly. That word barely captured the magnitude of what they had done. I took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "Your mistakes cost me everything. My home, my childhood, my trust. You left me to survive on my own, and now you want me to save you? After everything?" Amelia tried to speak, her voice shaking. "Oliver, please, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean for this to happen." I cut her off. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You lied, manipulated, and destroyed my life. That's not accidental. That's deliberate. And you still expect me to forgive you because you're in trouble now." There was a long silence. I could see the regret and desperation in their eyes, but it wasn't enough to erase the years of neglect and betrayal. I felt a strange sense of power, finally able to express the pain I had carried for so long. But along with that power came clarity. I realized that forgiveness wasn't mine to give. Not yet, at least. They needed to face the consequences of their actions first. Over the next few weeks, I watched from afar as their situation worsened. The family business collapsed completely. Debts piled up, and they were forced to sell their home. I didn't intervene. I could have lent a hand, offered guidance, or even financial support. But I chose to let them experience the reality of what their choices had wrought. It was not cruelty. It was justice, a hard, necessary lesson they had refused to learn when it mattered most. Amelia reached out to me again, this time more desperately. "Oliver, please, we're losing everything. I know I was wrong. We need you." I paused, my fingers hovering over the phone. For a moment, I remembered the countless nights I had spent working 3 jobs, living in that tiny, moldy apartment, learning to survive without any help. I remembered the tears, the loneliness, and the betrayal. And I remembered Clara, who had been my support, my confidant, and my partner through it all. I remember everything. I typed finally, my hands steady. "But this time, you face the consequences. I won't save you. You had your chance, and you chose poorly." The response was immediate, a frantic mix of apologies, pleas, and desperate excuses. But I didn't respond. I had finally reclaimed control over my life. I had broken free from the toxic cycle that had haunted me for years, and no amount of regret from my family could change that. During this time, Clara and I grew even closer. We built a life together that was grounded in trust, honesty, and mutual respect, the very values that my family had failed to uphold. We moved into a larger apartment, traveled for the first time without fear of obligation, and even started saving for our future. The irony was not lost on me. My family, who had once seemed indispensable, had become irrelevant in my life. And yet, the lessons I had learned from them, resilience, perseverance, and the importance of self-worth, had shaped me into a person I was proud to be. Months later, I learned that my family had completely lost everything. Amelia had to take odd jobs just to survive, and my parents were forced to rely on distant relatives, who had little patience for their mistakes. I felt no joy in their suffering, only a solemn acknowledgement that this was the natural outcome of their choices. Life, I realized, was not fair, but it was just. Looking back, I understand now that leaving Ravenwood was not just an escape. It was a necessity. It allowed me to grow, to learn, and to build a life that was truly my own. My family's betrayal had been a cruel catalyst, but it had also set me on a path toward independence and self-respect. Through it all, I learned the hardest lesson of all. Forgiveness is not about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your own power. I didn't forgive my family, not yet, but I had forgiven myself for the pain I had endured, and that was enough. And as I sit here now, with Clara beside me, our future bright and unburdened by the past, I finally feel free. Free from betrayal, free from manipulation, and free to live a life defined not by my family's mistakes, but by my own choices, my own courage, and my own resilience. The months after my final confrontation with my family were quiet, almost surreal. Ashford had become my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe, without the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Clara and I continued building our life together, and every small accomplishment, a promotion at work, a weekend getaway, a dinner with friends, felt like a triumph over the past. Yet, even in this new life, shadows of Ravenwood occasionally surfaced in my mind. I thought about my parents, about Amelia, and about the years lost to misunderstanding and deception. I wondered if they had learned anything from the collapse of their lives. But I quickly realized that their journey was no longer mine to guide. The choices they had made were theirs alone to bear, and my responsibility was to myself. One crisp autumn evening, Clara and I took a walk along the river that ran through the heart of Ashford. The golden leaves swirled around our feet as we strolled in silence, the only sound the soft rustling of trees and distant chatter from nearby cafes. I held her hand tightly, feeling the warmth and security that had once seemed impossible after the chaos of my past. "Oliver," Clara said softly, breaking the silence, "do you ever think about them?" I paused, considering my answer. "I do. But I don't let it control me anymore. I've learned that some people aren't capable of change, and some lessons can only be learned the hard way." She nodded, understanding the weight behind my words. "You've grown so much. I see it every day. You've taken everything life threw at you and turned it into something beautiful." Her words made me smile, though a part of me remained solemn. Growth often comes from pain, and while I had achieved a sense of peace, the scars of betrayal would always be part of my story. But rather than seeing them as wounds, I now viewed them as marks of survival, proof that I had endured and emerged stronger. As winter approached, I received an unexpected message. It was from a distant relative in Ravenwood, someone who had remained neutral during the family drama. They wrote to tell me that my parents had moved to a small town nearby, struggling to rebuild their lives in anonymity. Amelia, they said, had taken up work in another city, trying to atone for her past mistakes in her own way. I read the message carefully and felt a strange mixture of emotions, pity, sadness, and a hint of satisfaction. I didn't respond. Their paths were their own, and I had no desire to reinsert myself into a life that had caused me so much pain. My family had learned, or perhaps would learn, the consequences of their choices without me. Instead, I focused on the life I was creating with Clara. Together, we invested in a small apartment with a view of the city skyline, a place where every corner reminded me of how far I had come. We adopted a dog, Max, who became our constant companion and source of joy. We celebrated milestones and small victories, never taking our peace for granted. One evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the quiet streets of Ravenwood, where betrayal had almost crushed me, to the bustling life of Ashford, where love, trust, and perseverance had helped me rebuild, I realized how much I had grown. "I can't believe how far we've come," Clara said, resting her head on my shoulder. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Neither can I, and to think it all started with leaving Ravenwood. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most rewarding outcomes. I knew that forgiveness from my family might come one day, but it would be on my terms, not theirs. For now, I was content with letting them face the consequences of their actions, while I nurtured the life I had fought so hard to create. As night fell and the city lights sparkled below, I felt a sense of closure I had never known before. The pain of betrayal, the loneliness of starting over, and the struggle to rebuild my life had all shaped me into the man I had become. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was the architect of my destiny. And in that moment, holding Clara's hand and watching Max curl up beside us, I understood something profound. Life is not defined by those who abandon you, but by the courage it takes to rise, to forgive yourself, and to embrace the future. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer dictated my present or my future. I had reclaimed my power, and in doing so, I had discovered a life richer than I had ever imagined, one built on resilience, love, and unwavering self-respect. The lessons of Ravenwood were clear: trust wisely, value loyalty, and never allow anyone else's mistakes to define your worth. I had survived betrayal, rebuilt my life, and found happiness on my own terms. And as I watched the night sky twinkle above Ashford, I knew that this was only the beginning of a life lived fully, freely, and authentically. No matter what happened with my family, no matter what challenges lay ahead, I had learned to stand strong. I had learned to protect my heart while still allowing it to love. I had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from revenge, but from rising above, from reclaiming your life, and from never letting anyone else's betrayal steal your peace. And with that knowledge, I finally felt truly free.